function of the cell, the protein in the cell. So basically, the cell membrane is now the interface between the environmental signals and the protein functions in your body, which again, if you think about it, is total confirmation of what D.D. Palmer was talking about. He said the signals that control the biology came from the outside of the system. Huh, the man was way ahead of his time. So understanding the switch is the understanding of life, the mechanisms of life. Most important understanding so far, all of the control was generated from outside of the cell, not inside the cell. The cell is a complement to the environment that it lives in. This becomes very important when we want to translate this about people and their biology and their health. They are a complement of the environment that these people live in. This is important for diagnosticians to recognize this point. This is the neat part. You recognize that this switch controls biology. And now what I want to do is give you the name of this switch. I said receptor effector is a scientific name. I could give you a name like awareness of the environment through physical sensation. But you know, on a movie billboard, it's too big a word. You want a shorter word to what the switch is. And guess what? There's a word already in the dictionary that describes exactly what the switch is. And here's the word. Perception. Perception. Awareness of the elements of environment through physical sensation. The switch is perception. Perception controls biology. How does it work? Well, let's go back to our model. We said that the body is made out of protein, which gives us our structure. We also said that when a signal binds to the protein, it changes the shape of the protein, which then leads to the function, which is behavior. But now we add the two components that we have to add to the list, and that is the environment, the original environment that the organism is in. The signals from that environment hit the cell membrane. And from the cell membrane, a secondary signal is what is then sent to the protein to activate the structure and create the function. The point about it? The environment is source. The environment is where all the information comes from. And this, again, fits D.D. Palmer's story about innate. It's the environment. That's where it comes from. But the membrane is the interface. Basically, we're not controlled by genes. We're controlled by perception of the environment. And therefore, the first conclusion I'd like to give you right now is perception controls behavior. Well, I said there were 100,000 or more different proteins in a cell. An important point to understand is this. Not all of the proteins are inside the cell at any one time. Sometimes a signal shows up and I may not have the appropriate protein machinery to make a response. So if I don't have a protein in the system, what would I do where would I go to find a protein to put in the system? Where do you get the information for proteins from? And the answer is the nucleus of the cell. That's where we bring the DNA in. DNA is a blueprint. You didn't get a set of genes that you just have permanently locked in the rest of your life. You have a set of genes that will change as you go from environment A to environment B. As you change the environment, you change your genes to accommodate the new environment. So your functions will always adapt to the environment that you find yourself in. It's the environment that you find yourself in that controls your biology. Interestingly enough, all of this so far is still conforming to D.D. Palmer's point of view that he had back in 1895. So all of a sudden, we're not victims of DNA as much as we are victims of the environment. Again, there are 5% of the population, actually less than 5%, that came here with defective genes that interfere with their lives. But that's such a small population. I'm really dealing with the 95% of the population that expresses some kind of illness or pathology that is not related to the genes. Okay? So, conclusion number 2. Perception controls genes. So perception, it's interesting. Perception controls behavior by the signals directly hitting the proteins of function, or perception controls genes by the signals going into the nucleus and hitting the regulatory epigenetic control proteins. The bottom line about all of this is perception controls biology, not DNA. I'd like to, in this second section, continue on about how chiropractic is really a much greater scientific foundation than conventional allopathic medicine has in regard to the new science that's evolving. Conventional science is chastising the biomedical community by saying your textbooks are out of date, which means your processing and your effort to heal are out of date along with that. So for example, The proteins inside the cell under the membrane generate the behavior, the functions, digestion, respiration, movement, excretion, whatever. But they do it in the process related to a signal, and the membrane's the switch. Well, here's the issue. If an allopath would look at the cell and say that the behavior is off, then what they would say is, well, if the behavior is off, that means the signals are off. But according to allopaths, what are the signals? Molecules. So what they would do is try to suggest that we give you a drug or a chemical to correct the behavior because their efforts to adjust the signal. Of course, the new physics says that the signal is energy is 2 orders of magnitude more effective than the old chemistry. The drugs have a function and then about 3 pages of side effects. And the reason why the side effects come in there is this. There's redundancy throughout the system. The same signals are used over and over and over again in different places of the body for different things. The system is quite complex. There's a lot of crosstalk in it. The reality is, putting your hands into the chemistry is a big mistake because we don't have any understanding of the nature of how complex and interactive this chemistry is. And that's why almost all drugs, when you see them advertised, have tremendous amount of side effects associated with them, primarily because there are many redundant uses for the same signals in the system other than what the allopath might be looking at the time. So we say, well, what about the chiropractors? What do? They adjust energy. Chiropractors adjust causes instead of just treating effects. And this is very important, for the difference is this. Allopaths are more tied up with the symptoms and are working on fixing symptoms without doing causes. Now, sometimes people get confused by this, so I thought of an interesting story about when the first time I came to California. I went down the coast along the ocean near Big Sur, and it was just so dramatically beautiful. I said, I have to get out of the car and go onto this beach. And I went out on the beach, and the water was blue, and it was so exquisitely beautiful. This is my first trip to Northern California. And I had my shorts on. I said, well, I'll just take my flip-flops off and stand out in the water. Do you ever eat ice cream or something cold, and as soon as you eat it, you get this like headache from what happens is when you chill the blood real quickly, you get a headache. So without knowing it, I took off my flip-flops, run out in the water, stand out there and looking at everything, and all of a sudden, bam, I got this like migraine smash me in the head. And it was like, wow. And here's where the difference is in between a chiropractor and an allopath. Had an allopath been beside me, the allopath would have said, oh, you have a headache. You should take some aspirin. What's that for? Fixing the symptom of the headache. The chiropractor standing on the other side said, hey, Bruce, step out of the water. Because standing in the cold water that Northern California has is freezing your blood so much that you're getting a headache from it. What's the difference? And the difference is the allopath was treating the symptom, but that was not the cause of my headache, but I had a headache. So my headache would have gone away, but I never would have affected what the cause was. The chiropractor saw right through the whole thing and said, step out of the water. The water is cooling your blood. That's giving you the headache. So the important difference is a chiropractic modality is really to get to the cause. And these are called subluxations, interfering with nerve pathway. The nerves send information, energy, from the mind to the body. So the chiropractors are energy adjusters. They're looking for where have you crimped the energy and have caused a symptom. So they're not looking at the symptom as the cause, but they're looking at the symptom as a consequence of a nerve problem.